talk, lunchtime here on the East Coast of the United States. Those of you who are watching the BBC TV may be having breakfast or a cocktail, in which case I can assure you that our speaker here at lunchtime will provide stimulation for whatever time of day you're at. Because Robert von Langh is probably among the two or three most important and most interesting thinkers in the world of conservation today. He's been head of the Department of Conservation and Scientific Research at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam since 2006. He began, however, as a gold and silversmith, and then was trained as a conservator in Antwerp. He took his PhD at the University of Delft, or Delft University of Technology, where he worked on the topic Technical Studies of Renaissance Bronzes. In 2015, he became the chair of NICAS, the Netherlands Institute of Conservation, Art and Science, and oversaw the building of a dedicated structure in the new Rijksmuseum devoted to conservation. In our Bard Graduate Center world, he has been an important figure, central figure really, in the building of our summer school in Amsterdam, which debuted last summer, a collaboration with the Rijksmuseum and the Conservation Department of the University of Amsterdam. And Deborah Cronin, professor here, was our contribution to this collaborative effort. Today, he's going to talk about the role of the Netherlands Institute for Conservation, Art and Science, and some of the philosophical issues that conservation now poses to us. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Robert von Langh.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I didn't want to come empty-handed, so I brought you all some Dutch licorice that you don't have to taste, but I think you should. So I'll just let it pass, and whoever passes for that can come to the next summer school next year. And the other thing is that three people already asked me as to, what are you doing here, as to this week that I'm here. I keep on thinking, what am I doing here? I'm here for the Bard Graduate Center, and I'm actually really giving my talk here. So that is something, the first thing that I wish to say, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here and to be talking to you and to be sharing some of my thoughts that I have. Some of these thoughts are based and built on my work that I've done at the Rijksmuseum. I've been working there for 21 years. Actually, no, that's the 1st of November, so almost 21 years. And I started the year before that as an intern. In the meantime, I've also been at various other institutions here at the Met. I've done exchange as a scholar, scientist at the time, and sorry, and also at the Bargello in Florence, at the Consiglio Nazionale di Ricerche in Sesto, Fiorentina. And finally at the Getty, where I was a scholar, a museum scholar in 2011. And because I did my PhD on the side, as they say, then you every now and then need a little bit of time off. So those places, and Italy and Los Angeles, I went to do exactly that. Because the answer is very simple: do not do a PhD next to your job, where you actually wish to build something. So the Rijksmuseum, that's where I'll start with, and this is how we opened in 2013 with a big bang. Fireworks during the day. It was really quite fun. You see our queen, at the time, Queen Beatrix, with Wim Pijbers, our director of the Rijksmuseum at the time, where we were opening the Rijksmuseum after 10 years of renovation. And even though here you can see this building, people always said, oh, you've been closed for 10 years. Well, that building was open for 10 years and we had 1 million visitors every year. So it was not entirely true. This is what nowadays the center part of the Rijksmuseum looks like, the gallery of honors, as we call that. And immediately I want to point out, for instance, this painting over here, Frans Hals, the Merry Drinker. Well, I think most of you have already learned or perhaps saw in the papers recently that with Frans Hals, for instance, that can be quite a debate as to where an auction house sold the painting of his hand, which everybody thought that it was by Frans Hals, and then scientific research actually proved that it was not. and we're talking about multi-million dollars, you know, where people are, well, having trouble with to define. I'm going to talk about that later during my talk. So when I explained to Laura, just when I came here, she said, "Who's the other guy?" And I said, "It's Barack Obama." Anyway, this is just to prove, I think, that we think, and it's also meant more as a joke or with a blinked eye, how do you call that? That you wink. Yeah. That we say that actually, if you look at the schools of painting, that we have the Italian school and clearly also the Dutch school and the French school. And as a result, that people sometimes, if you go to various museums, can think of this as an important thing from the painting's point of view, 17th century, part of the 18th century, where the Netherlands are really known for. So in my, when I gave a little bit of an abstract, or when I gave my abstract, it was also about, you know, the painting, and I see it has, well, it's not completely on it, but I think you get the point of the night watch. Actually, the painting for which the Rijksmuseum itself was built. So the whole building was built around for the purpose of this painting, which is at the end of the Gallery of the Honors, the picture that you just saw. And where I said, well, actually, where I went with an important art collector from the Dutch school from the 17th century paintings, and he said to me, "Robert, why do you know why Rembrandt never actually finished the painting? And then this is so typically Rembrandt, where he didn't finish, and for instance, the little dog." And I looked at him and I said, "But you're completely wrong. He did finish the dog. It's just if we take it in a close-up." Then already you see a little bit as to something might be happening, and perhaps you know that this is Gerrit Lundens, who made a copy of the Night Watch. It's not exactly as vivid as the original. It's much smaller. So the Night Watch is like well, about the size of this hallway or this room, and then the painting of Lundens is only by, you know, quite small, 1 meter approximately. And there still you can see the dog, that it is grayish blue, and that it's really vivid. So what is the case? There is definitely decay taking place. This is painted with smalt. And smalt could be, depending on what the additions are to the paint itself, is a cobalt oxide. And the cobalt oxide is actually, can be bluish, or is usually bluish and grayish, and then fades over time into a darker place or a darker color, as you see here. So basically what you see here is definitely the case of where also these paints, as to where we think that they don't decay at all. Ernst van de Wetering, I heard him say, when we had the late Rembrandt exhibition, he said, you know, somebody asked him a question, "How long will these objects last?" He said, "Oh, forever. Only a meteorite can actually break this down." And that is so much not the case. And I had to say to him, I said, "This is the first time that I heard you say something of which I really think that is..." Well, you can finish that sentence. And he looked at me and he was like, I never really thought of it like that. And that is the whole issue. We never really think of it like that. We always think, it's there. Well, before I continue already, I just want to spin your heads a little bit on for instance, unvarnished paintings. For instance, a Rothko painting, painted in the 49s or, you know, late 40s. And then if we would take that frame off, do we think, and it's not, I'm not talking of knowledge in this case, but do we think that there will be a discoloration that has taken place for something that was revealed, or, you know, where it had sunlight, UV, etc., and where it was hidden from all these circumstances? And I think we all would say, yeah, probably. Or if we think of photographs that we have, you know, we all know that 20 years old photographs, they all fade away. Whereas if we see them like that, we're like, oh no, there's nothing right, in perfect condition. Yeah, we can exhibit it, we can do this, we can do that. And whereas over time, of course, these problems really do occur. And over time, we have to do something about that. And this is going to be part of the keys of my talk on that. So, it's not a Photoshop picture, because that's what I sometimes think myself when I see this. This is the Rijksmuseum, what you see over there. And over here we have the Ateliergebouw. There's still no English translation for that's the building of the studios. It's 90,000 square feet of conservation, research, education, and I'm going to show you some of these pictures of what we have. First I will focus on what we have from the Rijksmuseum point of view, and then further on I will also talk about the NICA's, of course, where the Rijksmuseum is one of the founding fathers of. So from the second tower, what you just saw on the picture is where we have clearly paintings. I think we have everything in the sense of we have paintings, we have ship models, we have furniture conservation, we have wood conservation, textile conservation, glass, ceramics and stone, metals conservation, book, paper, photographic materials, and my department is right now is 80 people altogether, which is including that those are conservators and scientists, and actually some curators as well. Irma Hermans, perhaps a name that you all know of, is also in my department, and that is also combining all the efforts that you will also get note of in a second. What you see here is Gwen Talbot, one of our paintings conservators, and for instance what we believe in, and we've been able to convince our board of directors, or actually a board of trustees from, is that we need top class materials to work with, and not just a collection. But also, so what you're looking at is a Hyrox microscope, and here on the right side you can see patterns, meaning it's a two-dimensional and a three-dimensional microscope, for which we think that all studios should have these, so that we really have top-class equipment to work with and to understand what it is that we're looking at. Because in 9 out of 10 cases, I was taught, as you just heard by Peter, as a craftsman to begin with, as a goldsmith in another field, but really the way when I came into the museum, it was, I remember that my head of the department at the time said, Robert, here is a polishing cloth, there's the silver collection, go polish. And shush. I did it. I mean, I did do that. I got to know the collection and really wanted to understand what it is, etc. But clearly seeing, we need to do much more than that. We have to awaken ourselves. But at the same time, here you see Iskander Brebaert, one of my colleagues, craftsmanship is definitely a very important issue. Meaning, anybody who is a conservator with us, we say, well, you have to be able to make the objects that you're looking at. If you can't, if that is not something that you can do, then there is something missing there. But I also say it doesn't necessarily always have to be in one person, because how many sheep with 5 legs do you know? It should be a combination. It should be really a combination of where you combine the people and the knowledge to create a more full and comprehensive idea of what the objects are about. To reflect a little bit on let's say, history, okay, these are hats, right? Does anybody have a clue where these hats are from? Wow, clearly not, right? Well, you
I
do.
might know.
Yeah.
But if I guess and I'm wrong, I'll be really embarrassed because there are students in here, so I don't want to take a risk.
Oh, come on.
Are those the Nova Zembla hats?
Yeah, Spitsbergen.
Yeah.
And this is where, so what happened? In the 17th century, okay, we actually as a country, we were great. We were part of this, this New Amsterdam thing over here. That Peter knows much more
Make
about.
the Netherlands great again.
Thank you for the. I'll enjoy that moment for a second. The thing is, there were whale hunters. The whale hunters actually went to Spitsbergen, and there they lived and died. And when they died, they of course were buried. And in 1986, there was an excavation that took place, and with that excavation, what they found is for around the 100, I believe, 37 graves, 86 of them, and might be off on the numbers, but still the idea of it is there, that the people who were buried there, they just had a little bit of cloth, so linen that they were wearing, so completely decayed. But funny enough, all the clothing was taken away except their heads. And this is, you know, the heads, if I look at the brown one, it's also really, they think, that's cute. It's really something that you think, that's the identity. That's their identity that they are buried with. And perhaps too philosophical from that point of view, but still, if Carola, who is in this case, who has been treating these objects, she always said to me, like, this is the greatest thing that you can do. This is where history and the materiality of things, of our history actually comes together. And that is, I think, that sense, that feel of that wow feeling as to, yeah, that is what it is about. That is about what working in cultural heritage, I think, is also about. So in our building, we don't work just by ourselves. We have a nice Ruisdaal sky at the back, and here we have Femke Dieris, one of our curators, who is mounting a vase, a tulip vase, and perhaps of the Hercules Seekers that Huige Leeflang is studying over here, this print over here, which is going to be an exhibition here also at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The revenues, or the reflections, or what do you call it, that are written right now in the newspapers with us are enormous. He was a printmaker who was collected actually quite a lot by Rembrandt. Rembrandt had 5 of his paintings and some of his prints, and already in the 17th century it was collected in the provenance we know very well. The 75 prints and etchings that we have of him in the Hinderloop collection that was with us already as one collection since the 17th century, and where it was already collected. Samuel van Hoogstraten has written about it for the real artist, the true artist that we can recognize in Segers. And this is just, well, even though I only have a print like this right now, it is beautiful, and definitely for you to see later. But also metals and science, or actually diagnostic equipment for what you're seeing here. On the left, X-ray fluorescence spectrometry is usually always abbreviated as XRF. So what it does is elemental analysis, telling you what kind of elements, so is there copper, is there tin, is there silver, etc. in the object that Joosje in this case is examining. And then for instance here we're looking at XRD. I'm not going to bother you too much, forget about those Scrabble words, because I'll only win if I'll have to put the X's and the Y's for that. But more seriously, to say what is actually then the crystal structure. So what are we looking at? What kind of corrosion product, what kind of material, what kind of pigment, etc. are we looking at? And that at least we have that kind of equipment to do those analysis. So if we take the object as a starting point, and I think for what is not so much new, because it has been done in many cases, and actually already for decades, and also here in the United States, for instance, in Boston, the Strauss Center, for instance, where people have been working on this same way already for a very long period of time. I think what we are doing right now in the Netherlands is really breaking down the walls between all the various fields, between art history, between conservation, and between the science. And what do I mean with that? I think in many, many museums around the world you will find that in many cases the curator is, so to say, has the final word. We said no, we're not going to do that. And actually, of course, if it is in the end for a whole collection, so for keeping the collection, it really should be the curator who's saying, oh, we're going to move into that direction or into that direction. But on an object-based research, you should have this on an equal basis. And this is really what logic It should prevail in that case, and it should not be anything else as to I'm the boss, where you get this guerrilla-like features taking place as to no, we're doing it my way, etc., etc. I've been there, I've seen that, and that was for me an inspiration to say no, that cannot be the case. What should be the case is that the object is the thing that we should be talking about, and not as to who is in charge about this. So if you put the object in the central place, and this is what we do in the Rijksmuseum, so this is before we started with the NICAs, then you have the art technological research that takes place. That can be on old manuscripts, that can be on books, but can also be on the object itself, of course. There you work together between a curator or a conservator who will be doing those kind of jobs. Next to that is you would have the diagnostic research taking place as to what is it that we're actually looking at. So if you have an object here, and you realize that this object, well, let's say it's a 17th century object, in this case I need you to be a little bit imaginative right now, and we put that in the context of that era, then of course we look what is written or at the time, and then from a philological point of view, but also from the content point of view, are there any treatises on what it is that we're studying right now, and what can we do with those parts? Can we, for instance, reconstruct, where the conservative then plays a role, not necessarily only those people, but by definition to start with, of course, because the reconstruction of an ID comes also with the skills, the manual skills that, for instance, the conservator also has. Then this is really something that needs to be done to understand how was this object made. And then finally, if you have aging or decay that takes place, that is also something that we have to understand, and where we have to collaborate with the scientist and the conservator on that specific part, to really, with the evaluation, that you all understand what it is that we're looking at. So what happened? I think about 3 years ago, no, 2.5 years ago, the director of the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research, NWO, which is here in the left bottom, that director said to me, Robert, I have 5 million euros for you, and believe it or not, he actually did say that. And then I went to our board of directors and I said, guys, we should do something with this, right? And we should, because it's scientific, it's only for a call for proposals, it's only for science. But science combined with the humanities, and combined with conservation. We were able to convince NWO to invest in this, to actually really say, it's so funny, if I look at chemistry, if I look at physics, so my PhD was in material science and in art history, and I was thinking, well, we're completely missing the point, because what we're not doing is we're not making use of the things which are there. What I mean with that, the heterogeneity that we are working with, so the objects that we are working with, the amount of parameters that you have in order to study and actually to understand something is immense. So I was just talking about this object, so now 21st century, and that we said, oh, it was a 17th century object. And now we have to look at the decay that took place, degradation that took place, and that we have to contextualize that decay that took place. Well, how do you do that? The amount of parameters that you have there becomes a completely holistic approach that you have to have. And not only from a materials point of view, but also from the contextualization itself, from history or art historically, and then combined with conservation. So we said, if we're going to fund, or at NWO they said, if we're going to fund this and we want to, then it should be a collaboration between those various fields. So the founding fathers of the NICAs were the University of Amsterdam, Delft University of Technology, so this is a purely technical university. Here, University of Amsterdam was with the conservation department, but also with the humanities department, also with the Institute of Physics, also with the Van Hoff Institute of Molecular Studies. Then together with the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands, that is the state collection, that is enormous, that is actually in every museum in the Netherlands. They have objects hanging, standing, or being there. And then also, of course, the Rijksmuseum. And why do I say of course? Well, the building, it's not because that the building is a Rijksmuseum building. The building is already housing the University of Amsterdam with the Conservation Department and the Cultural Heritage Agency. So as a result, with the Rijksmuseum being present in there as well, and having the ability where we have convinced our Board of Trustees as to, okay, we should invest in this, that as a result we get not so much money, but that we get the means to do exactly those things, and where we also have the possibility to convey the message that we believe, or let's say our mission, to other people, to donors, sponsors, etc. Why don't you invest in these things? As an example, in the Netherlands we invest yearly 1.2 billion euros on health. And this is research, only research. It's 90 billion, this is for 16 million people. I mean, are we a wealthy country? I think so. If I think of, I'm very happy, of course, clearly. It's heaven on earth. But for me it's very difficult to grasp that we spend 1.2 billion on healthcare, and of course we should. We definitely, I don't want to take any of that money, but I don't understand is that we are all with the living, etc., etc. But we grow older, and many of us luckily do because of exactly those aspects. Yet the things to go and look at, that declines. And actually that becomes less and less. And those are things for which we're nowadays many more times saying, no, that panel cannot travel anymore. Oh no, this cannot be exhibited anymore. And why? Well, to be frank, because I think we don't know. As a conservator and as a scientist, I really think that we don't have the knowledge. We don't have the knowledge to really say that something can or cannot travel, or for something can or cannot be exhibited, simply because of the fact that we lack the knowledge. We have not been combining science, art history, and the humanities, and conservation really together, and really focusing, what are our problems? Let us please define what our problems are. Because globally, we don't. And that is so weird. And that is when I thought, or when we thought, we should really put this all together. So conservation, art, humanities, and science. And you cannot disconnect these things. And if you wish, well, then you're nowadays from another planet, or that you want to go to another planet. Or that you should be. No, seriously. We really think, and last week I was in Paris with Taco Tibbets, our new general director, and he was sitting there as well, and he said, this is what we do. We collaborate between the three fields. And you might think, wow, that's not so specific or not so important. Whereas, especially in France, where museums don't hire conservators. They all are, they have their own private practice, and then they're hired as such. Whereas we think, not say that that is bad, well, what I think of that is not so important. In this case, I have to be careful with that thing on. You put me there on that spot. I created myself there and was digging a hole, I guess. Yeah. I was pleasantly surprised how the French, our French colleagues, responded to that. No?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good beginning. Good, yeah, you're climbing up.
And still I mean it. Because also everybody realizes as to, yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages about that. So putting the object in the central place is what it should be about. At least that's what I believe. And as a result, we created then the NICAs. And we even want to go one step further. And I understand this is only because we are a small country, we can do these things. So it's between the government, universities, art institutions, and industry. And this is also what is being forgotten. And this is where I usually stand up and I want to put my fist on the table and say, don't we understand, don't we realize how much more important and the core that we are from our society. Whereas for the amount of money which is being invested, it's futile. But really, it is the core of our society, of how, what we all think, what we are in a Western society, as to what we think, what should be from that point of view, as to where we should be focusing on, is that two things. Not only that we clearly, for that reason alone, should understand really what is taking place with these objects, meaning how was it made, what is it that we're looking at. Of course, the craquelure in a painting was not there. That came after drying. Well, how did it dry, etc., etc. That depends on the circumstance of the painting. Then the decay that took place, the degradation that took place, do we think that is going to stop now? No, it is not. It is clearly going on. So if you then extrapolate and then actually use those kind of studies to extrapolate for the decay, that is degradation that is taking place, then you can also try to imagine how much longer it will take that these things have vanished. And that's where industry actually comes in. Funny enough. Akzo Nobel is one of our sponsors. Very happy with that, because they are saying, hey, what you're doing might also be of benefit for us. So we are doing indeed those studies, the studies of really mathematically saying, well, how the prediction as to how long will this actually take before something actually really goes down and that it's down the drain. And then they're saying, we can actually directly implement your studies in what we have in industry. And this is where I think, this is where we have to open up a complete new approach. Because the holistic approach that we're taking, and then from different fields, is really something that is of much more interest than we have been thinking so far from our fields. And that is combined with the three fields, science, humanities and conservation. And we don't realize that we're sitting on a gem, on a pile of gold. But we only see, well, not dirt, we see the beauty of what the art objects are, but we don't see the valuable parts, I think, as to where we should be looking at, and also really say that other people, and then of it, whether it is industry, but also really society is interested in what it is that we're doing. So for instance, even though those 5 institutions are the founding fathers, we of course collaborate. With the Mauritshuis, we have now a joint position between the Mauritshuis and the Rijksmuseum, where Annelies van Loon is a conservation scientist who works at both institutions, funded by a private sponsor. Here you have the detail taking place, where if you focus in a little bit more, you see all these lead soaps which are then occurring. Lead soap formation, it happened to be found by Jaap Boom some years back in the Netherlands, who was at the Van Hoff Institute. And everybody at the beginning was like, this is not really a problem. Now we organized a conference on that, and 230 conservators and scientists actually came, meaning this is taking place everywhere. And what does it mean? Well, that the surface of your whole painting actually is completely changing. And this is something what is taking place. With the industry, we realized that for what you're looking here at, this is a synchrotron in Grenoble, but also with CERN, etc., with linear accelerators. I actually did my PhD myself on synchrotron, not in a synchrotron, in a neutron facility at the Paul Scherrer Institute in Switzerland, and at the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, realizing that at those fundamental physics departments, or actually places, you can learn a lot. And you can really see what is nowadays happening within that field. And then we had there XRF scanning that took place, and I will show you that in a minute. This is actually an XRF scanner that you see here right now, that in the end is developed together with Brugger, a company, together with Delft University of Technology and then the University of Antwerp, to study art objects, but then instead of having to go to these linear accelerators, that you do that in the lab. And that is of course what we aim at. It's great that we have those wonderful institutions where you can do everything, but how can we break that down to something that we can actually really use in the laboratory ourselves? Two things of the decaying. First, of the decaying that takes place, that takes place, the cadmium yellow, for instance, the fading of the flowers, and in this case Vincent van Gogh. Here you see, for instance, the top layer where a cross-section has been made, whereas the cadmium yellow is really yellow still underneath, but everything what you see here, it has completely degraded. And of course, this is a process that continues to take on. With the XRF, what you do with that is elemental analysis. So you scan the whole object. For instance, the red might have some mercury sulfide, which is vermilion. And depending, so you look for the mercury, you look for the sulfur, and those elements will actually can reveal what is underneath. So here, the painting has turned around, and if we then look at the zinc that was detected, so zinc white that was detected, we could find clearly the pose of two boxers underneath. If you then go back, and in this case a letter 555 from Vincent van Gogh to his brother, there he actually he talks about it. That he, and this is just to practice your Dutch a little bit. En ik kan nu twee lui die mijns inziens mooi tekenen, beide helemaal van deze week schilder ik een groot doek met twee naakte torsen. Now I would have expected that you would have said, yeah, naked torsos, naakte torsen. Two wrestlers, a pose of verlat. So meaning, you can also use these scientific approaches to reveal things which are hidden underneath, that you cannot see, or well, hardly see, using other techniques, for instance like X-ray, normal X-rays that you take with that. With the syndics of the Drapers Guild, we did the same thing. And then we learned that, for instance, this by the way is really interesting, I think as well. Johan van Loon, Volker Janszoon, Willem van Duijenburg, Willem van Duijenburg, Arnold van der Meijden, and oh my gosh, is my brain now not functioning anymore? Oh, what are you called? Who are you? I'll get to you in a second. And Bell, the servant who's there in the middle. Why is this important that I show you this at 1661, that Rembrandt actually in his late years decided to paint them? Well, they were elected on Good Friday in 1661, and then they decided to have the late Rembrandt paint their portraits. And everybody is like, oh, this is like taking a picture, and is Johan van Loon, is he really standing up? Or Volker Janszoon, is he standing up over there? Or what is happening? This is like a snapshot that you take. This is the earliest Instagram that you can think of. The beauty of it is that, for instance, the table, if you look at the table is the perspective of that is completely wrong. Also with the book, which is on the table, the book looks as if it's a book of 1 meter long. That is not the case. Those books, we know what they look like. They are not that tall or that wide, big. The point is that he totally does not care about it, and he totally gets away with it. And it's really surprising that we think, oh, this is really how I painted, etc., etc. Well, that is not the case, because first he painted Bell over here, he painted Bell over there, then he put them over there, and actually there's, I believe, yes, here you can also clearly distinguish him as well. So fighting with it as to where shall I put it and how shall I put it to really get that notice of. Why do I mention all these things? So why do I think that this is important? Well, that is to come back to that auction house. And where we have to do nowadays full researches of objects, and that's not always possible, but in many cases it is really wanted, to understand what is it that we're looking at. Because if something is or is not by the hand of this master, well, then it is or is not, it does or doesn't have that value. So we're expanding on those technologies, and here you see Annelies van Loon, who's now between the Mauritshuis and the Rijksmuseum, Patria Nobel. together with our colleagues from Tokyo University and the University of Antwerp, where we are here on a painting which is called The Jewish Bride, also by Rembrandt, and then using X-ray diffraction. So again, looking at we're trying to build new techniques as to where we think, if we would put this one and that together, then we will be able to do that. And perhaps we should do it like that. And meaning, as a result, we're really advancing much faster and so quickly right now that everybody becomes really interested in what we're doing, and industry becomes interested in what we're doing. And that is the focus, of course, for what we do in total. So to sum up, the collaboration with the art historians, conservators and scientists, that you work together based on historical sources and tools which are there, which creates scientific data, and the scientific data, as a result, are also tools. So data science is something that we use a lot, that we nowadays call computational data and tools. So Rob Erdman, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, he's like super bright on that part, and he really understands as to how you can combine all these types of information and really get the whole, let's say, picture, or the complete picture, or that we understand much more of that. Also, what he has done here, I don't know if any of you have already seen the Bosch project.org, so which is on Euronymous Bosch, and there he has created new features as to how you can study the artworks. And one of the things that he's now working on is Morelli's vision. And Morelli, as you all know, as to by recognition, these things are all belonging together. I think nowadays with data science and for what we are creating with that, in 10 years' time from now, the photographic memory is not necessary anymore. It's really going to be that you're going to click on an image, and then click on that image, and then all of a sudden all these other images pop up, which have really the same features, where you use deep neural networks and machine learning within computers, and that is what we are doing right now, to understand as to how can you bring this knowledge back together. So you have this enormous amount of knowledge, well, how can you bring that back to the object, and how can we really learn from that? And that is by using data science. Data science is going to be the future for, I think, all of us. In 10 years' time, 20 years' time, nobody's, well, of course, we will look in books, etc., but all those things will have been digitized, and all the information will have become available. Not the context, don't forget, we still have to think. It's not all being done for you, clearly, but the means, the tools to bring you to new understandings, definitely, that will change. So you have the art historical or the historical scholarship, the social sciences, which all, and the conservation practice, all these parts, as you can see them here, physical science and data science, they all come together. And then finally that data science part is really important, and I think that should be also really the focus for us. Because we want to understand what the past was, we see what the present is, but we have no clue of what the future will bring us. And this is something where I think, well, clearly what should be the models of material change, what are the novel conservation treatments, should we be using argon, so that no oxygen can be there anymore, and so that you will slow down the decaying processes. Those are questions that need to be asked, based on knowledge, and not based on, I think this. So in order to do that, we have conferences, we get together some many different topics where we think, yes, this is something that we need to share. We have fellows, and that is also clearly very important, and with Peter I would love to talk on later this afternoon for any possibilities between various institutions. Don't forget, we already, next to the Graduate Center, we also have a signed MOU between the Metropolitan Museum of Art with the Getty and with Geida University in Tokyo. So this is, and now also with the Louvre, CDRMF, this really becomes stronger. So even though I perhaps made a remark about the French, alors on peut continuer en français si vous voulez, parce qu'il n'y a pas de problème. Aucun. And clearly, and this is what we also do. Deborah, beautiful picture. We bring each other together because we really think that we should show the things for what took place in the past, the beautiful things, but also the worst part of what society can bring us, as to the history part, as to where we also realize it was not all just beauty that we're talking about. And to bring those things together from, indeed, sometimes a philosophical point of view, but really in a tangible sense, to say, look, this is our history and it defines us to what we will be in the future. We really have to understand first what took place in the past to create our new futures for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. The floor is now open for questions, either in French or in English.
Or Dutch.
This is wonderful to hear. Thanks so much for this. And I couldn't agree more about the need to bring these various fields together and the advances that have been made. You mentioned the Strauss Center at the Harvard Art Museums. That certainly was, I think I was there 20 years ago. And we brought things together there in a way that I think was, I hope, helpful for other institutions. But what now worries me is where we go from here, because what you've described is where we are, and that's great, and lots of people don't understand that's where we are, but where do we go from here looking forward? And what concerns me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is to do with what you were saying about thinking, and the place of thinking, that we cannot do without that. That seems to me to be what's, in a sense, missing. I don't mean this in a derogatory sense. What I mean is, once you have understood the physical complexity and makeup and making of any given thing in much greater detail and with much more nuance than was previously possible through the disciplinary vociferation of attention, wonderful, but then what do you do with it? And that's what concerns me. How do you then use these things?
And thank you, great question. And you're not talking from the dissemination point of view, as to share, as to the knowledge that we have. But do you then mean it in a more metaphysical point of view, as to?
I mean, what do you do with that knowledge? How do you build on it? What do you actually deploy this for?
Well, I think various. First, let's say there's an economical factor. For instance, I'm here also this week for the TEFAF and I'm in the vetting committee.
Yeah. I'll see you there this afternoon, tomorrow.
And well, for instance, there is something or is something not by a certain artist. If it is, then it's worth $1 million. If it's not, it's worth 10,000. So I think there is an important issue nowadays, an economic factor. Why should combine these and the science and humanities and conservation? So connoisseurship, which is swearing sometimes still with in the art history field as to connoisseurship. Oh no. Whereas when it comes down to it, funny enough, what I've not included is the public. The public wants to know these things. If I tell people, oh, you know, how do you call those CSI arts? Then everybody's like, oh yeah, I would love that. So what we have, and what we're not realizing, and that's that pile of gold I think what we're sitting on, we don't realize how much people are interested in the things that we are doing. And I think, I realize that we're not making the benefit of that. And it's not about making a benefit, no, it's the realization that these things will all gradually go away. And of course not in one lifetime, but in several lifetimes. What do we do with it? Well, for me, it is. I understand that if we don't put these things together and we simply continue the way that we do now, these processes will only go faster, and as a result, we will lose more, and less will be exhibited, and as a result, the enjoyment of it will be less. And whereas we are, and then thinking positively, where people grow older, the things to enjoy from it becomes less. That will be strange. If we have the means, if we have the true understanding as to what is actually taking place here, and that we're not making use of that. And that is simply because of that we were not putting the money there in order to do that. But to also take that or to perhaps try to take that more in a deeper sense as what I sense that you mean with that as well. I think it really comes down, and I really presume that there are many more scholars among you who could define it much better as to what it would be for a society to understand what its society actually brought, and that which is tangible that we can actually now have, but that we still don't really understand. And 2 generations back, I was talking about Rothko. We haven't got a clue almost anymore as to how these things came about in the late 40s. And that's so funny, because all this kind of history is hardly being passed on, or not sufficiently being passed on. And only because we don't have the means to do so. So should we not be spending a little bit more time and efforts and money on those kind of things well, that's perhaps to make this a better world, but please respond.
No, I would love to. We must talk. I'd love to talk with you about this, and maybe we'll have the opportunity over the next few days to take half and elsewhere. But what I'm really concerned with. I don't disagree with anything you've said. I'm concerned with the intellectual process of using this knowledge in a variety of both public and disciplinary academic senses. How can I, as an historian, make use of this? You showed us material from Nova Zembla, those amazing hats, which I think are among the most fascinating and evocative things in the whole museum. The concentration camp clothing that you showed at the end, hugely emotive things. How can we use the knowledge that you are so persuasively showing us we can now get together, gather and consolidate? How can we then, for example, use this as historians to understand human actions, not things, but human actions? That's just one example.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not expecting a
but I'd love to respond to that if that is allowed. If you have art history and history, what I notice always as the difference between them in art historical debates, if something is within an oeuvre of an artist, then people are usually and let's go into a little bit of a polemic here, where people are usually looking for arguments that will define their thesis, their theorem, whereas historians don't. As to where they actually look, or not, hopefully they don't
look
elsewhere. Well, no, but meaning as to what took place that can be in favor of your argument, or cannot be in favor of your argument. And many of the books that I read on art historical, then oeuvre catalogs or anything like, then I think, hey, but wasn't something written over there that actually says the opposite of what you what you say here, and why are you not using that? And I think that let's say within science, for instance, those endeavors are not done. You cannot do that. You have to bring into the equation what needs to be into the equation. I think what this by itself, the collaboration will bring, is also the attention that it brings to that. I said to Jan van Kampen, one of our conservators, historians, art historian, he's an art historian. I said, Jan, why don't you get out of your ivory tower and come down and swim away from your atoll? Because as an art historian, that's where you are. And he said to me, Robert, and it's not bad, I don't mean bad with that, I love it here. He said, let me be here, I love to be here.
We all like our own cages.
Well, but, and I think that is one of my points. Jeroen Stuppel, for instance, he said, he really embraced this whole data science thing. He was like, oh my gosh, the things that I had to know in the past to understand for the things that I'm looking at, is that in 10 years time from now, I will have these kind of tools that will really create a new approach that I can make use of with my mind. So how will it help us with that, it will help us. New tools as to where you can actually ask the questions that you are interested in a much diverser and I think more accurate way.
Thanks. You have to excuse me. I'm going to the same meeting as my colleagues who just left. So, Emma.
No, don't worry. No.
I see Regina, and then Deborah, and then Jessica, and Malcolm.
Hi. This is really interesting, thank you. I was just thinking about the historical context of the Netherlands itself, and I was wondering perhaps this could be another train of thought to consider, maybe in response to what Ivan was talking about. You talked about the historic circumstances of the museum itself. Now, in terms of forward thinking, and you talk about social science, I'm an anthropologist, I think about the role of ethnography. So perhaps a slightly different audience from the art historians you've been talking about so far. So with so many museums like the Rijksmuseum, the Tropen Museum, thinking about how they can recontextualize their colonial collections, you know, for a period of time now where we ostensibly don't have any differences between the colonizers and the colonized, us and them, empire is no more. So I wonder, as a thinking point perhaps, how this kind of elemental materiality you're talking about could be connected. And I know it's very complicated, but I'm wondering if you have any examples or you...
Well, I think that is, for instance, the clothing of Isabella, the clothing of the camps, for instance, that is an aspect of that. We also, when we did the studies, we also had a slave band that was used. And if you do the material analysis on that, that's not going to bring new perspectives on that. I do think that the objects actually tell the story of what was directly related. So what is the story actually, what it is directly related to? And I think, at least for instance, what we are doing in the Rijksmuseum is acknowledging that that is definitely part of our history. And that is also something that we should show. It's not all just glamour and beauty that we should show. Of course, if you put the object in the central place, then that is the materiality of the object that we put in the central place with this approach. So don't forget that next to where I'm saying art historians or curators, conservators and scientists are taking this approach, it doesn't mean that we don't need people like Jan van Kampen who are saying, let me be here, because I'm contextualizing this from another aspect, from another point of view, which has nothing to do with the materiality, which is really about the history itself and how we should look at that. So I do think that there's an influence of one to the other. And since we did not have that influence before from the materiality towards the historical aspects of it, now we are creating with that a new dimension. And as a result, I think you're creating automatically more depth to it. Not necessarily directly applicable, but more depth as to where people could be saying, huh, I did not realize that, or hey, this is interesting, that point of view. But even if we look at the dyes that have been used on the camp clothing, that doesn't tell us anything, because it has nothing to do with the context that the clothing actually originated from. So
there are limits. There are limits to what the object can tell us.
Definitely so. I would think yes. Absolutely.
If I could just jump in to answer Ivan's question, because you've sharpened it up, Rommel. I mean, the fact is that I think what Roberta has presented is the way in which this kind of approach can generate lots of new knowledge, but the questions have to come from elsewhere. In a sense, it's the wrong thing to ask the conservators both to produce the knowledge and create a revolution in question asking. Ivan's question is really best posed to historians and art historians. And in a sense, that's what cultures of conservation is about. It's about connecting people who can now give more answers to people whose job is to create new questions.
So that's a perfect segue to my question, if I may jump in here. And that is, it was great to see that, and thank you for the pictures of our wonderful summer. The question that I have is really, how much knowledge can a student of humanities I mean, how much do we have to know in order to ask those questions? Because there's a translation that goes on between, if we don't even know what kinds of things are possible to know, how can we even generate the questioning? So it's kind of a circular process, and I think we're kind of wrestling with that here at the BGC at the moment. How much can we teach our students who are studying the humanities? They're not scientists, they're not trained in any kind of scientific method, to know enough about what sorts of techniques are out there to get to the next level.
I think when you, in answering that question, it's also, it's almost perhaps rhetorical, because I think that we always think from our own perspectives, from that point of view. And so, as when I was young, how would I now think of that? Whereas, I'm also thinking, I didn't grow, well, I kind of grew up with computers, so to say. But nowadays, everybody, you know, a 25-year-old person is completely grown up with computers. As a result, the ability to look at things and to search for things and to search for knowledge is diversified versus to what it was a generation ago. And I'm not so much afraid of that, because I think that will find its own way. And of course, the beacons which are there, which are the beacons that we set out? And I think that should be more on a meta level, where we say, oh, well, if you want to understand, if you want to grasp a little bit of how this world has worked and how it may function in the future, by understanding how it worked in the past, then these are the beacons that you need to have. And so I think it would be more the search for the beacons that you have to set out, and perhaps that is still not answering your question.
Well, I mean, let me just give you a concrete example. Is this okay? I was always taught that with ceramics, you couldn't really use, you could date them, but not very accurately, because you could only tell when the last time it had been fired. Now, this is old. I'm assuming that now there are much better techniques that you can actually date ceramics much more carefully. But if I didn't know that, I mean, how as a student, you know, how do I find out exactly how accurate we can be? Because then it would change the whole way that I'm doing my research project, because then I could say, okay, well, I want to find out if the ceramic was made in 1450 or 1525. And if there's now a scientific way to do that, it's going to change my research process completely. I mean, another question is, how would I have access to that as somebody in a university?
Well, what we've, a great question. I'm very happy that I think I have an answer for you. Is what we've started with the NICAS is science for curators or art historians, and art history for scientists. And so in 1 week, people are being completely, you know, you get 3, Jennifer Maas, Katrien Keunen and Ralph Erdman. Those are responsible for exactly that. So what are the techniques which are being used? What is it all based upon? So if people are saying XRF should be IR, UV, hyperspectral imaging, all these that you think like go away. Well, if it is being explained to you in such a way, then in layman's talk that you understand, and then after a week you go like, oh.
Right, I can use that to ask this question.
Can I ask, my question is really related right on the tails of Deborah's. I'm also a conservator and now here at BGC as a fellow. I noticed that in many of your diagrams you've placed conservators centrally between the scientists and the art historians, as though a conservator is the necessary intermediary between these two groups of people who, I think what the assumption is, don't communicate well between each other. I think one thing I'm interested in is, you know, how does conservation maintain its centrality, and how does, I think a sort of related question is, how does conservation get away from taking from other disciplines and more toward giving? Because I think a lot of us in conservation will refer to how we borrow from other disciplines. We borrow from scientific analysis, we borrow from different techniques when we need them, but how can we make it so that conservators are giving and maybe informing innovation? I think it was really interesting what you're talking about partnerships with industry. How is conservation research going to affect technological development?
I would say, and I'll do it myself, is let us straighten our backs. I think we've been, in the Netherlands, if you want to become a conservator, usually you do a bachelor's program, can be in any field, usually it's art history. Then a master's program is 1 year after that. So that's 4 years in total. In order to become a conservator in the Netherlands, it's 7 years that you have to do nowadays. Not saying it's better, has nothing to do with that. No, it's a discipline by itself. So what I mean with straightening your back, it's a discipline by itself, which actually is multidisciplinary, that indeed you have to understand what in the science takes place, and indeed have to understand in the humanities what takes place, because you're contextualizing this object from a materials point of view. And then you have to keep it as well, and then you have to work on it as well. It's ridiculous, basically, what it comes down to. So, what I suggested with us, with Taco, is that, Taco, why don't we stop conserving or restoring any of our artwork for 1 generation? That we only do research. No more treatments. Just do actual research, because we haven't got a clue what we're doing. We're using Biva to glue back flaking paints, and yeah, it has been there since 1960. What is it, 7? And you know, and we haven't got a clue basically what we're doing. So what I think is that what we have to do in order to be giving is first to understand, and we are now working way too much and way too many times from I would say a skills point of view, as to, oh, this is how we've been taught, oh, and I'm really the expert, I'm really very good at doing this or that. Go away with that. And I wanted to say something else. Go away with that. And no, first to understand, and I think the giving part is where indeed, yes, I mean, I was a conservator and I did my PhD was in material science, and then Frits Scholte was my promoter or advisor on the art history side. When I thought, I'm there, I'm finished, he said, you've done great work, it's published, etc., etc. But now you have to put it in the context of you know, the sculpture in the 16th and the 17th century. What do you actually now think? And now put that in a different perspective. Then I understood as well, like, yeah, this is what it is about. You cannot just say from one field, oh, and I claim their fame or anything like that. Absolutely not. It should be about collaborating, and it should be about how we can do these things together. But as conservators, I would definitely say we have been, people have been feeling too many times to be put down, and as if they're less important and lesser. Oh my gosh, can we please stop that? What do you say then? Nonsense? And straighten your back and actually say, this is what we stand for, and at the same time, don't always want to treat objects. Because that's the pitfall of the conservator.
Is the attention to the manual?
Yes, as to, I want to treat this object.
I very much like what you're saying about this sort of collaboration, and you know, I remember I worked for 30 years in the V&A, and so I was working with Tony Radcliffe and Jonathan Asher Smith, and the young Francesca Baber, which is but back then it was as if the curator or the keeper or the assistant keeper, they were expected to know. You know, they knew, and there was this was the assumption, and then there was a sort of reaction against it with some of the conservators who, I shouldn't name any names, but you know, some of them were very dismissive about curators and especially about art historians. What do they really know about? You know, we the conservators know, because we know. We've looked at this in the way that the art historians haven't. So that you know, there was arrogance on both sides, but from the point of view of the curators, and I think from teachers and art historians writing, there was an imperative to produce some sort of coherent narrative to describe how things were made. And what's really sort of opened up is the possibility of just acknowledging more and more how complicated these things are, and that we don't know. So what we're talking about is not knowing, really. Yeah. And I was recently fairly recently curating a show where we brought together 8 different versions of one portrait bust, and then this was at Yale, and we did digital scanning of these, and naive soul that I am, I thought, you know, we could work out what the relationship is, which was quite complicated, and in fact it hasn't. What it's done is to complicate it more, but in a very interesting way.
Yes.
So does this make sense in terms?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But it's actually sort of working and being in dialogue in an equal way.
I can complicate this a little bit more by saying, oh, we should not be using 3D scanning, we should be using photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is actually where you just take pictures of the image, and where we have to create the data science at such a level that if you do it from when you take 16 pictures of an object, so to say, that you can use photogrammetry to reconstruct exactly those, and where you can then overlap them very easily with the others.
Yeah,
without having to scan them.
Actually, I misdescribed it. That was what was being done. This is Holly Rushmeyer at Yale and her team.
And I think you're completely right as well about the teams that were actually going against each other. And now I'm such a believer of collaboration.
Yeah.
I mean, I always have been, but if we don't see as a field of humanities, as to cultural heritage, that this has to take place, and has to take place from that point of view. Doesn't matter that we need the Jan van Kampens who are actually saying as well, we need the people who are on their ivory tower, if you wish to say on their atoll, because they also produce context. But at the same time, every now and then that they build a bridge and say, hey, what's happening nowadays? What's happening now? And oh, that's interesting. Because Jan van Kampen is also in a NICAS project, which has been funded, and as a result, he has to collaborate with all these various fields. And now we're looking, for instance, at the glazes. So all the blue pigments which are in there. If you now do non-invasive techniques and look at those glazes, then you can actually see, hey, I see patterns taking place, meaning this factory actually must have worked. So that means that, but that's strange, this one also belongs to that. Should this then perhaps mean that I've been wrong about this, and that this actually relates to that one? So new information that you're getting, and as a result, provides you with new insights.
Yeah, and so I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit if you could talk about this next decade of research, you guys. What does it practically look like? It sounds like you're doing these great collaborations, bringing in specialists, but for a room full of people from a humanities background, does that mean you're in lab coats, running experiments on, I mean, what does this actually practically look like? Or dream about, or?
I think the data science is one of the most important features for, I think, what can you expect from this methodological approach for the coming 10 years? Well, first, indeed, that new non-invasive techniques are being made. If I see there has been about now 4 to 5 decades where people are going into a painting, taking a sample out, and sometimes, you know, in the 70s and the 80s, then you see that they did like 30, 40 measurements on one painting, that you think like, what? Why? Just because you didn't have the techniques at the time, you don't really have to do that. So going for non-invasive techniques, that you can actually really get the complete picture of, in this case, for instance, a painting. Then using data science, and where it will not, augmented reality will happen much sooner than we think, that you are with an iPhone in front of a painting, that you can see the painting, and you can say, oh great, really, what does the IR look like? What is actually really by Rembrandt? If you look at the Jewish Bride, we calculate about 78% of it is still by Rembrandt, the rest is additions. So what are we looking at? We think that we see a Rembrandt, but is that really the case?
What does it matter?
And that's the contextualized question that you can then ask if you know that is, and then you can say, it didn't matter to begin with. Well, that I'm not sure with. Because, for instance, the cap that he's wearing, well, is an invention of my colleague 20 years ago. I don't think we want to see that invention of my colleague 20 years ago. I think we want to see as to what the painter actually made. I'm thinking. So to briefly sum up as well, the data science is really where I think, oh my goodness, we are going to advance so much, and that we can ask different questions, like Peter exactly said, and just have new ways of focusing at things.
Have you found it challenging to, because this is, I mean, bringing in data science is a lot of computer scientists who don't necessarily have the backgrounds that we would approach these questions. So I know coming from UC San Diego, there's multiple collaborations between the computer science department, the engineering, the art historians, and the archaeologists, but there's actually quite a challenge in speaking the same language. And how, so do you have a full-time computer science, or like ideally computer science staff that you guys are incorporating into?
So for instance, Rob Lubman, he's a senior scientist with the Rijksmuseum. And he happens, we're quite lucky with him in the sense, he won the 2012 award of best professor at University of Arizona. The guy is super bright and also knows how to bring hardcore science to people from the humanities. So what it comes down to is social skills.
So the Rijksmuseum is full of people with social skills.
No, that's definitely not true, of course not.
That's why they're nice and welcoming.
Merry company.
But that's like anything in life.
Right.
I mean,
So I think we have time for one more question. No? Okay, so I think the formal part, for those of you watching out there, the formal part of this meeting is over. Thank you very much, and Roberta, thank you very much for very stimulating lunch.